Iranian Revolution. A lot of you guys are too young to remember what was going on back then. Iran was always called Persia. So if you guys hear the name Persia or read it in your Bibles, it's referring to the country today named Persia, Iran. In 1936, that name was changed to what is currently called Iran. The country had over 2,500 years of monarchy, which is ruled by kings. In 1978, the Ayatollah came back from Europe, and the Iranian king was ousted, and the government was changed from a monarchy and a democracy to a theocracy, which means ruled by religion, by religious leaders. This is a time in the country I was born into. By the time that I was 6 or 7 years old, really understanding what was going on in the world around me, the Islamic government had taken over the whole thing. So I really grew up knowing nothing else besides history books. In 1981, Iraq attacked Iran, tried to invade their next door neighbors. Because of that, Iranian people all went to back the government in order to save their land, which gave the government at the time a wider the ability to control the country. So like I said, by the mid-80s, when I was starting to go to school, everything in the country was completely dominated by the Islamic government, by Islamic laws, everything Islamic. Everything from your breathing, to your eating, to your sleeping, to your the way you dressed, to how you conducted yourself, had to adhere to the Islamic laws. And we'll get to that later on too. I grew up in a family that was not quite religious as far as Muslims go, and you'll find that with 9 out of 10 Muslims that you'll meet. How many of you guys here know a neighbor or a classmate or somebody who's a Muslim? About half of you guys, see? And if you guys are from towns like Edmonton and Calgary, which I visited, there's large population of Muslims there now. Mostly from Somalia and from Pakistan, but really from all over the world. So I grew up in a family which was like most of the Muslim families, very secular. We call them cultural Muslims. You guys know Christians who only go to church on holidays or on Sunday mornings? Well, most of the Muslims are like that too. They go to their mosque on holidays, or they go there on Friday afternoons, which is their service time, main service time. I myself though, I love God. I love the idea of God, and the only God that I had presented to me at the time, or until I left Iran, was Allah, was the God of Islam. So I knew nothing different. I sometimes use the analogy like this. Imagine you grow up. I grew up with one kind of chips. Salted chips, one brand, nothing else. So my idea of chips was that one brand and that one flavor. So in 1995, at 16 years old, I come to Canada, and I walk into my first supermarket with my parents, and there's a whole wall of chips. And we didn't know which one to pick from, so we picked the first bag. Come home, I put it in my mouth, I had to spit it out. It was salt and vinegar. And I remember I exclaimed to my parents, I said, this is not chips. They might call it chips, but this is not chips. So now imagine you grow up in a country and in a culture where the only version of God that's given to you is one. One brand, one flavor, one type. You don't even know anything else. So really, my whole construct of God was Allah. There was nothing else besides that. Growing up, I was a little more into my faith as other people were. So I studied about it. I started learning about it. And slowly, I started finding holes in it. This here is the Quran. This here is the Bible. They're both holy books. This one's holy because it's from God. This one's holy because it's got holes like Swiss cheese. Okay? So I was starting to find the holes in this thing. And by the time I was 13, I really had lost my religion, as the famous REM song goes. I had lost my faith. I had given up on Islam. And the process was like this. I was growing up, going to school. After school, I was going to the university where my mother was an instructor at, and spending my afternoons there. And I was seeing contradictions in what people were teaching and what people were doing. For example, the first question I ever asked, and this is something you guys got to understand, to give it a background. There's 3 phrases you guys will hear which are completely different, and they're not understood. There's the Islamic world, there's the Arab world, and there's the Middle East. And the 3 of them are completely different. The Middle East is an area where it's the Arabian Peninsula, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Israel. That's the Middle East. The Arab world is just the Arabian Peninsula. Qatar and Bahrain and United Arab Emirates. The Muslim world is much larger than that. It's the Middle East, it's North Africa, and it's Southeast Asia. All the way from the Philippines down to New Zealand, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, those are Muslim countries. The fact is, more Muslims live outside the Middle East and the Arab world than inside. Countries like India and Indonesia and Malaysia, they have the largest Muslim populations of the world. Not places like Saudi Arabia where it started from. So this is a really important thing to understand, because everywhere that you look at Muslims, there will be differences in the way they practice things and the way they look at things based on their culture, because it's infused with their culture. A lot of times I participate and watch and engage in a lot of debates between Muslims and Christians, and one of the things Muslims pick on Christians about is that you have so many different sects. You know, you have Lutheran and Baptist, and you have Pentecostal, and you have Jehovah's Witnesses, but they forget to tell you that they have 700 sects of Islam themselves. 85% of those, however, are what we call Sunni. You guys have heard that. 10% are what we call Shia, and the other 5% are the smaller groups on the side, like Baha'is and the Ahmadiyyas and the Ismailis. These are all small versions of Islam. The Sunnis, Sunni comes from Sunnah, which means to follow the example. The Sunnis follow the examples of Muhammad. They try to dress like him, eat like him, act like him, and do everything like him. The Shiites, which are about 10% of Islamic world, and most of them live in Iran, are people who have branched off from the Sunnis. They're the second major branch, and they follow a dynastic rule of Islam. Basically, they say the bloodline of Muhammad was more important than his actions. So they believe that the leaders of Islam have to come from the bloodline of Muhammad. So when you look at the mullahs, mullah just means a cleric. This is Islamic cleric. You'll notice they wear turbans. There's two types. Most of them will have white turbans on. Some will have black turbans on. The ones with the black turbans trace themselves back to the lineage of Muhammad. So I grew up in a country where black turban mullahs, who get their authority from the bloodline of Muhammad, were running the country. Now these countries, like Iran, like I told you, was Persia. Iraq, that you hear about on your televisions, that you've been hearing since 2001, was called Babylonia and Mesopotamia back in the day. Syria was Assyria. Turkey was Lydia. Libya was Carthage. Egypt was, of course, Egypt. There were never Arabs, and there were never Muslims. What happened was conquest, because Islam dictates that you conquer land, the people of that land either become Muslims, or they leave, or they lose their heads. And over time, Islam also dictates that all Islamic prayer, all Islamic conduct be done in Arabic. You're not allowed to. You can have a translation of the Quran, like this one here, and if you guys, if you later want to look at it, I'll let you have a look. It's got an Arabic version, and it's got an English version. You can have translations to understand, but if you want to recite it, if you want to pray Muslim prayer, you have to do it in Arabic. And that was the first issue that I ever took with Islam. I said, you're telling me Allah created the world, He created everything in it, but He can only understand one language? How does that work? And I would, of course, get punished for that. I would ask, how is it that you tell me that men and women were born and all came from Adam? But when I go get on the bus, I get from the front door, women get on from the back door, and they're confined to an area in the back. How is it that a woman does not have the right to divorce, but a man can divorce his wife by just saying it? How is it that a woman's inheritance is half of a man's? How is it that if I kill a woman, my penalty is half that of when I kill a man? These contradictions started very early. These were obvious things. I mean, these are the obvious things. And later on, I got into more kind of nitty-gritty type of stuff. I would go to my mother's university after school, and I would notice that there's two water fountains next to each other. Muslims use one, Christians and non-Muslims use the other one. And I would say, why? And they would say, because they're unclean. They have a word for non-Muslims. They call them najis, which means unclean. And I would say, well, how is that? We, the Jews and the Christians, we all supposedly believe in the same God. So how are they unclean? So they would punish me for that. I would go to their cafeteria. Imagine the cafeteria we had today. Imagine you go in there and there's 2 sets of buckets for utensils and trays. And imagine that you as Christians have to put your utensils in a different one and Muslims have to put it in a different one. And I ask, why is that? They go, because they're unclean. We can't put our utensils together. We can't sit at the same table. So these contradictions started to really make me question things. And by the time I was 13, I had found enough stuff to say, okay, I'm done with this. This doesn't make any sense to me. And this seems to be a theme of my life for a long period of time. I'll explain to you. At the age of 13, I started going to a high school which was somewhat geared toward the gifted children, they called it. But really what it was kids who were excelling in academics, but were also troublemakers, so they wanted us all in one place so they could brainwash us even more. Well, the opportunity that gave me was that I had a whole bunch of other egghead troublemakers with me now. So we all became a group. We became politically active. We started doing things like writing in the borders of library books, sneaking out at nights and spray painting the walls, you know. And then when we got a little older, we started spreading opposition papers into our neighbors' the mailboxes and in our classmates' desks at school. And this went on until 1994. At the time, I was 15, and I got caught with these papers at school, and I got severely punished for that. And what happened was I was expelled from school, I was banned from post-secondary education, I was banned from working for the government, and I was banned from travel. Now this happens to Jews, to Christians, and it also happens to Baha'is in Iran, and those who are troublemakers. When this happened, I had two younger brothers. My mom, as I said, worked for a government university. My dad was a CEO of a government gas company. They had very good positions, but this brought them under scrutiny. Because now here's the black sheep of the family causing trouble, bucking the system. What are you guys doing about it? So they started coming under scrutiny. And my parents, to their credit, they realized that this was not going to work. Because I was either going to end up dead or in the corner of a political prison, and my brothers were going to have to live with this stigma and the prejudice all throughout their lives. So without telling us,